For those who don't know me, my name is Ephrayim, and I spend most of my week here on campus. And we're putting on a series of practical kosher topics. And this topic, even though we hope it never happens, inevitably it happens all the time, which is blunders in the kitchen. You make mistakes. How do you go about it? What do you do when you make a blunder in the kitchen? So the first thing to know when you make a mistake or when something goes wrong is don't panic. So most of the time, in my experience, you won't have to throw things away. You'll call your rabbi, you'll call Kosher Australia. It'll turn out the thing which you thought was really not kosher is really not kosher, and perhaps the thing which you thought was really a big blunder, there is some buffer room. There's some ways around it. And even if sometimes you do need to throw away your food, or you might need to kosher your pot, or even throw away your pot, in the end of the day, you've got the ability to do something you really want, do something Hashem really wants, even though it might be a bit hard for you. But tonight, we're not going to go through every single possible mistake which can be made, because number one, it'll take a long time to go through every single possible thing. It'll be very detailed, and most importantly, you won't remember anything when something actually does occur. So instead, what I think I'm going to try to do tonight is give the overview of the various factors which come into play when something goes wrong. So this will help you in two ways. Number one, you'll be able to rule out very basic issues. So like sometimes you'll realize something is really not even a question, you don't even have to call. But it will also help you that when something does go wrong and there is indeed a question which needs to be asked, you'll be able to know, number one, which details do I really need to take down to ask my rabbi or to ask Kosher Australia. And you also have a better idea on what type of questions the rabbi is going to ask you and why he's asking them and where all these things fit in. That's what I'm planning to do tonight. Now, and I was expecting a lot of questions, so if you do have experiences or something as we go along, feel free to ask. I prefer call out anything during the time. I like that way better. Okay, so I've got two hats. On one hand, I work as a rabbi in Kosher Australia, but I'm also a food scientist. And I was going to tell a joke about chemistry, but I didn't think I'd get a reaction. Yeah, I see we're bonding. It's lucky I'm not giving a dairy shear, because the puns get really cheesy. Okay, so you get it? So how it works... Sharing Scott. Everybody. Just to quickly recap, we're not going to go through every single little detail of every single particular mistake which can be made. Rather, we're going to be looking at just the general factors you have to take into account when something goes wrong, so that you can have a better idea on how to approach a kosher blunder in the kitchen. And also, the other important point is if you do have questions, feel free to call out in the middle. If you have examples and you want to know how certain issues which came up, I'm more than happy to deal with it. So the way you can look at every single blunder in the kitchen is really kind of one big chemical reaction. Now, I'm going to show you a diagram right now. It's going to look a little bit confusing, but in the end of the shear, you'll see how all the little bits fit together. And you're going to see that anytime something goes wrong in the kitchen, we're going to have our product. It might be kosher, might be non-kosher, might be fleishik, might be milchik, might be halfway. You're always going to have your reactants. You're going to have the two things you got mixed together, the kosher and the non-kosher item. We're going to go through each of these items in a little bit more detail. We're going to see that it's very important that there has to be a catalyst. When a non-kosher thing touches a kosher thing, it doesn't magically become non-kosher. There has to be something which drives the mixture together for the kosher thing to become non-kosher. We're going to see, even if there is a catalyst, there are going to be some items which give us a bit of wiggle room, which I like to call buffers, and then there are going to be some things which make the situation worse, and something which make the situation better. We're going to come back to that by the end, and you'll be able to understand exactly what I'm on about. But let's start at the beginning. The next page, there we go. So when you have something mixing in your kitchen, you can have different results. Sometimes the result will be kosher, but the item might be meat. It might be dairy. Sometimes you'll be lucky, you'll get away with it being pareve. Sometimes it's something called dairy equipment or meat equipment. Does anybody know what dairy equipment means? Sorry?
Something where you cook milchik.
Something which you cook milchik. And what's the significance of dairy equipment?
It doesn't make a product milchik.
Doesn't make it milchik, but you can't eat that with meat. But if you ate it, you won't become milchik. So you can eat it after meat, or you can eat it before meat, but you can't eat it with meat. And we'll discuss it a little bit more detail. But sometimes you do get something which is treif or not kosher. But there's a whole bunch of levels of how much non-kosher it can be. So you can have sometimes a mixture where the entire product becomes non-kosher, and it becomes something which is forbidden b'hana, forbidden to benefit from, which means you can't even sell it. So you say meat and milk, when you cook them together, you can't sell it to anybody. You can't even give it to your dog, so you have to be careful when you have dog food that you can't have milk and meat together, because you can't get even any benefit from the mixture. Sometimes your product will be something which is forbidden to eat. Sometimes the whole product won't become forbidden. It might just be a finger breadth, so 2 centimeters. You'll have to peel off from the place where the non-kosher contacted the kosher. Sometimes you only have to remove the outer layer. Sometimes you don't have to remove anything at all. You just have to wash the product. And sometimes it's completely permitted, which hopefully will be often.
I assume that that's for the products.
Yes.
Are you just going to discuss the dishes?
We're going to get there.
Okay.
We're building it up. Right now we're going to see where might I end up with. The next thing is, after we see what I might end up with, we'll go back to the beginning of the reaction. What are the different types of reactants? So I can have meat and milk, I can have meat and pareve, I can have milchik and pareve, I can have kosher and non-kosher. I can also have chametz and non-chametz, but we'll keep it simple for now. We could have truma, yes, we could have tevel, we could have arla. Actually, this year there's been a lot of Israeli product coming into Australia because it's been a Shemitah year in Eretz Yisrael. And a lot of the product which can't be sold in Eretz Yisrael gets sold in Australia. So we've had a lot of tomato juices and corianders and paprikas, which usually wouldn't come into Australia, but now it's coming into Australia from Eretz Yisrael, and it's giving us a lot of issues. But the important thing to remember about reactants, it can be food, and it can also be dishes. So when I say I can have a mixture of kosher and non-kosher, I have to remember always I could be mixing food and kosher food and non-kosher food, or it could be kosher food with a non-kosher vessel, and vice versa. So we always have to keep those in mind. All right, so let's have some examples here. If I have meat and milk, what's my product going to be? Treif. Well, question mark. There's not enough information really to know. We have some different results. If I have meat and pareve, maybe. A meat pot and pareve pot. You're not going to get anything definitive from me. It might be meat equipment, non-kosher and kosher. Maybe it's forbidden. Non-kosher equipment and kosher food. Again, we don't know yet. We have to have some more information. If you just tell your rabbi, oops, I mixed this and this together, we don't have enough information yet. We have to see a little bit more. So here I'm going to start introducing you to some more halachic concepts. So that first word over there is not belila at night, it's belila. Does anybody know what belila means? Nivlal?
Inside.
Belila means to mix, bli'ah means to absorb. Okay, and we have 2 different types of mixtures. You can have a belila mixture, which means like here I've got my green, my little red things, that the green ones be kosher and the red ones be non-kosher. If I could take out all the non-kosher pieces, if it was only a belila, come in, it's fine. Welcome, Rose. Are you getting her on camera?
I didn't know there was another word coming.
Rachel sends regards from today. So Rose is very famous. Whenever I go to any audits, all the auditors are like, oh, why didn't Rose come today? Eventually I'll get to that popularity. So if I have a blila, it's just a mixture. If I could take out all the non-kosher things, I take out all the red things, and I'm just left with the green, then the green, I could eat the kosher bits because it was only mixed together. But if I have a bliya, if that's been absorbed, then some of the non-kosher taste or the non-kosher status has actually gone from the red pieces, from the non-kosher pieces, into the green pieces, into the vessel. And even now, if I take out all the red pieces, it's still going to remain as non-kosher. All right? And if we go back to our table from beforehand, we'll see that in the first 4 ones where I actually have to remove some of the food, that's because there's been a bliya. There's been some non-kosher which has been absorbed into the kosher food, pot, etc. In the second half of it, that requires scraping or washing, that's because it's only been a blila. I have to remove the non-kosher residues of the kosher food, but the actual food itself has not become non-kosher.
Give some examples.
Some examples.
One of Leah, one of Lila.
An example of bliya would be if I cook meat and milk together, or if I cook non-kosher food in my pot, if I cook a pork soup, then the pot becomes non-kosher, it's absorbed the non-kosher thing. If however I just put a cold soup inside my pot, then I can just wash out the pot. I don't have to worry about koshering the pot or anything like that. But we're actually going to look at that right now. how do I get a blia? How does the absorption occur? That's when our catalyst comes in. Okay, and we have different, halacha speaks about different types of catalysts. They don't call them catalysts, that's my word. But we do have, I'm not going to get into the details of every single one of them, because each of them are chapters worth in Shulchan Aruch. But when it comes to hot mixtures, so we have cooking. Cooking is, I'm heating something above 45 degrees Celsius with liquid. Does anybody know where the 45 degrees Celsius comes from? I mean, back in the days of the Talmud, there was no...
It's a machloket, what the temperature is. So basically, if you stick your hand in and you say, ouch.
Ouch. Yad soledet bo, which means the temperature which you put your hand in, you take out. There's some other measurements I give. One is the temperature of water when if you pour on the baby's tummy, the tummy will turn red. Don't try this at home. There's one of the temperature of duck's blood, which is about 43 degrees Celsius. So it ranges between about 43 and 72, but usually we accept it as about 45 degrees Celsius. So it's funny, 45 degrees Celsius in the English world, but for those in the old worlds, it's 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really 47.8 degrees Celsius. So
they did an experiment
yeah,
to determine Yad Soledet,
right,
because of the machloket as to whether it's the temperature at which you would jerk your hand out, or the temperature at which if you put your hand in, you take it out.
Yeah.
And the temperature range is 45 degrees on the low hand and 63 degrees on the high hand. So if you left your hand in and you'd remove it, that's when you jerk it out, and that's the
well, there we go. Very good. All right. Either way, so from a catalyst perspective, one of the catalysts is cooking with water, then I could be roasting. This is dry heat, which means I have a kosher and a non-kosher, or fleshik and parv, etc., etc. They've touched each other. There's only been a dry heat involved. There's been no liquid involved. I can have pouring. Pouring is when I've got hot water and I've poured it onto something else. So here it's kind of a slightly lesser catalyst power than cooking. Then you have steam, you have hot air. There's different laws. We're not going to go into all those details. But you should know it's not always hot, which causes blia, causes absorption. Sometimes it can be cold, soaking. There's two types of soaking. One is just soaking in any liquid. If I leave anything in a liquid for more than 24 hours, then an absorption occurs. I remember one story when I was still just starting with Kosher Australia, and part of my job was going to do spot visits on all the different caterers. And I went into the fridge of a very big caterer at the time, and they had in their meat fridge, they had some chicken soups in some plastic tubs. I guess they made the chicken soup and they had it in the fridge, and I guess they were going to decant it into smaller ones later on. And I was looking at these different plastic tubs, and one of them was an old Tempo yogurt tub. But the thing is, it was cold. But because it's been there for more than 24 hours, it became a question. We're going to find out later on why we could actually rule in that case the chicken soup was okay. But it's been staying, even though it was cold, it was more than 24 hours in that tub, so there was a question maybe it had dissolved. Another case of kvisha, of soaking, is if I have a very strong brine or vinegar. In that case, it doesn't take 24 hours. Even within 18 minutes, you're able to get a blia. Also, salting, if I have salted meat, or Ashkenazim at least, we are stringent that even if something is, when you taste it, it's a salty taste. If that then touches something else, again, a blia could occur. And we also have a couple of other scenarios. One is, this is actually both of them together. It has to be a sharp food plus pressure. So let me look at some examples. We'll go there. So let's say I have, oh, there we go. It doesn't really mix until you've got the fire. So say I have cheese and meat soup. So a bit of cheese falls into my meat soup, and I've cooked them together. So the halacha is going to be, it's going to be forbidden to benefit. Okay? If it's cheese and chicken soup though, so chicken is not involved, it's not really forbidden biblically, it's only rabbinically forbidden. So therefore it's, even if I cook it together, it's only forbidden to eat. You can sell your KFC cheeseburger, you just can't sell the McDonald's cheeseburger. What happens if I have cheese and meat soup, but it was mixed cold? So here there's no catalyst, it's only cold. If it wasn't there for, well, depends. If it's less than 24 hours, then I just wash off my cheese. I'm good to go.
You can eat the cheese.
Sorry?
You can eat the cheese.
You can eat the cheese.
And the soup.
And the soup.
Not together.
Not together. If it's more than 24 hours, then both the cheese and the soup become forbidden to eat, but not forbidden to benefit from.
If you deliberately mix them,
Ah.
are you then allowed to eat them even after you've separated them, or does the mixture become a
If you did it on purpose, we're going to... It speaks about bittul on purpose, but here, if the Kosher called on purpose, I'm not sure. I would assume... I don't know, I have to check. I don't know, I have to look that one up. I don't want to say something. Do you have any answers?
No.
The cheese is salty. Okay, yes, you have a question there. The cheese is salty. We'll have to look this one up as well. Depends on how salty. Okay, you get the idea though. If I have a milchik spoon and a meat soup, okay? I've got my chicken soup, I put my milchik spoon in. If it's cold, what do?
Rinse it.
The worst thing you could do is rinse it with hot water. Because if you take it out, you've got the chicken soup on your milk spoon, then you rinse it with hot water. There was no issue when you put the spoon into the meat soup. But now that I've taken it out and washed it with hot water, I've just made the problem. So yes, take it out, but wash it with cold water, please.
Where in the laundry?
Well, technically, it doesn't make a difference. If you're washing it with cold water, I mean, best to do it in the laundry. But I mean, technically, even if you do it in your meat sink or in your milk sink, it's all cold.
Have you got the flesh?
It's oily.
Which is oily, but you still have to, as long as you wash it off and it's cold, there's been no bli'ah. So there's been no absorption, it's only been a bli'ah, it's only mixed together. So therefore, as long as you wash it off, your sink doesn't magically become non-kosher. It's all okay. I wouldn't suggest that you start telling your kids to mix things around, but just so you have an understanding on how these things work. If I have a non-kosher knife and I cut an onion,
Going back to the pot, what if you have part of a soup
okay?
and the soup is hot and someone puts a milk spoon into it?
Ah.
No, it's power in
A power of pot, power of thing, okay. And you put a milk,
Totally power, and someone takes a
Hot?
spoon and the soup is still hot and then tastes it. Whatever.
and taste it. Okay, so we've got a few laws which we're going to be learning. Let's keep that question till the end because there are going to be a few of the other things we're talking about which are going to impact. So remember that question, right? We have a non-kosher knife and an onion. So this was that other case where if you would cut it, so you've got the sharpness of the onion, you've got the knife pressure, that onion becomes forbidden to eat. But if I cut my non-kosher knife and I cut a potato, a cold potato, not a hot potato, even though I've got knife pressure, I can just wash off my potato. If the knife is oily, you might have to, grind off the potato a little bit. But otherwise, it's okay. So too, sometimes if you go to a fish shop and they've used their non-kosher knives to cut the fish, guess what? It's being cold, it's not sharp. You have to worry about the oil on the surface of the fish, but you can at least get away with a grader of scraping off the surface of the fish, give it a good thorough wash, and you could eat the fish. In the first instance, it's better to go to a kosher fish shop or to give them your board to cut. But if you're stuck and you've received this fish already, and again, all these things we're talking about are oops, they're blunders. It's not something which you should go and do. If it happened, this is the halacha.
There was no such thing as a kosher fish shop quite a while ago, so.
There we go. So, all right. So now that we've done so far, we've looked at our reactants, we've looked at our catalyst, and we see how this can affect the product. So we're now going to bring in that other level, the buffers. Okay? And there's really two types of buffers which exist. The first one is very often quoted and very often quoted out of context, is bittul nullification. So the Gemara says that if I have a kosher soup and a bit of pork falls into my soup, okay? Now you have to take the piece of pork out, of course, because if you can see the pork is there, you can't eat the pork, right? So I say I've taken my pork out, or the pork has been mushed up with a zhuzha. Do you call it zhuzha? Everyone knows what a zhuzha is? A zhuzhi, yeah. It's a word which is understood in every language. As I zhuzhed it up, or I've taken out the piece of pork, I can't see anything in, what's the halacha? Can I eat my soup or not? So it depends. If I can still taste the pork inside the soup, then no. If I can't taste the pork inside my soup, then yeah, it's fine. But how do you know if there's the taste of pork in your soup? So back in the day, they would go to the next door neighbor, the non-Jewish next door neighbor, and there's a discussion, does he have to be like a chef, a kfela, somebody who's got a special taste for these things, or could it be anybody? And they would ask them, can you taste my soup for me? They'll taste it. Does it have a pork in? If you would say, no, I don't taste any pork, then you could eat the soup. Of course, this became an issue because you can't always find a non-Jew who's happy to taste your cooking. And also, trustworthiness and different things came about. So the rabbis actually made this test. They found this ratio also based on a pasuk, but they also made a test. They got leeks and they got meat, and they tested the ratios until they found that the meat will give taste. Will give taste if it's more than 1 part to 60 parts leek, but if it's less than 1 in 60, then it will not give taste. Okay, and that's where this rule 1 in 60 is. That's the general rule that we can assume if it's less than 1 in 60, it won't give taste. Yep.
If there is a little bit of pork in it, what happens to the pot?
What happens to the pot? Well, it depends. If it's going to be nullified, then we say that there's no taste, then the pot will be okay. If there's more than 1 in 60, then both the food and the pot will become non-kosher. Okay, so basically we have our soup, and I have a little bit of non-kosher mixed into it. If that dissolves now and it's less than 1 in 60, then be kosher. More than 1 in 60, not kosher. But there's some exceptions which everybody conveniently forgets. One of the exceptions is if an ingredient gives flavor. So if I had some coriander from Eretz Yisrael, which they didn't take out Meiser from, or it's a Shemitah coriander, and it fell into my soup, and that coriander gives a taste, even though it's less than 1 in 60, it's a spice, it gives something taste. Well, the whole idea of the 1 in 60 was it doesn't give taste. If something is giving taste, obviously it doesn't become nullified. For those who are up late at night for the Shavuos Shir, which just next door, we have a big discussion with Slurpees and juices when they have flavors added into the product. So the rules of nullification, how does it apply with flavors? That becomes a bit of a discussion, which we'll leave for another time. Another example is a chazusa, a coloring agent. So if I drop something in, but even though it's less than 1 in 60, but I can clearly detect that it's changed the color of my mixture, that doesn't become nullified. If I do it on purpose, I can't put in my pork on purpose because I want to put pork in, even though it's going to be less than 1 in 60. If I do it on purpose, it doesn't work. And finally, you can have things which might thicken it. So if I drop some gelatin in, even though it might be less than 1 in 60, if it thickens the product up and I can again see the result, I can see the effect of it, the nullification won't work. So that is my that's one buffer which we have. The second buffer, I'm not going to go into too much detail because it does get a little bit complicated. Oh, before I get to the second buffer, let's do some examples. So I have milk, and milk drops into my meat soup. I cook it together. I would think that it's going to be forbidden, but because it's only 1 part milk to 60 parts meat, therefore it becomes permissible. If however I have a milk spoon, and that goes into my meat soup, and I cook it together, if the volume of the spoon is less than 1 in 60, then it becomes permissible. The question is though, we're not going to get into all these details, but say I'm putting this amount of the spoon. What volume of the spoon do I have to measure? Do I have to measure the amount of spoon which goes into the actual soup, or do I take into account the entire volume of the spoon?
So why are you measuring the volume of the spoon as opposed to the volume of the meat that could possibly be absorbed?
Okay, so we're assuming that the spoon has been used, and we'll get to the details later, but we're assuming that the spoon has been, you correctly point out, we're assuming the spoon has been used to to cook milk that day, and we assume that the volume of milk exceeded the volume of the spoon, so therefore we're working under the assumption that the entire volume of the spoon is filled with halachic milk. But yes, you're correct. If I would have a spoon which has never been used before, and I used it only once, and it only was used for a little bit of milk, then I only have to take into account that little bit of milk. We'll talk about 24 hours old later. Good. Yes, that becomes a bit of a discussion. How much of the spoon do you measure? The second type of buffer...
Can I just ask, in terms of deliberate bittul,
Yes.
what if you deliberately put the chicken in to your, to your bigger pot of beef or whatever it is, but you thought it was a kosher chicken? So the action was deliberate, but you thought that it was kosher.
So here we're going to be debating what is considered to be a shogeg. Does it go on the action? Does it go on to your machshava? I have to look up all the details to remind myself before I give you a clear answer. But yes, that is discussed by Shabbos, what exactly is shogeg and what's not. Good point. But then you just blame Kosher Australia. If they said it was kosher and you put it in, so then it's up. All right, we have doubts. The second type of buffer is when you have a doubt. So you can have a suffix and you can have what's known as a svek, which is a double doubt. So it could be a doubt, maybe this thing is kosher or not, and then say I put it in and then my milk spilled, then my pot spilled and I can't measure if it's 1 in 60. So I have a double doubt. I have a doubt maybe it was kosher. Even if it wasn't kosher, maybe there was 1 in 60. So a one doubt is good enough for a rabbinic prohibition, and a double doubt is good enough even to allow a biblical prohibition, but it has to be an objective doubt, which means this doubt cannot be known, not that I don't know it. It's not enough to say, well, I don't know if I don't know if this product is kosher or not, and I can't really bother looking into my kosher book, so it's a doubt, so therefore I can have it. It has to be something which it cannot be known. That's the only real doubt. I'm not going to get into too much details because it does get a bit doubtful and detailed. So, those are your 2 buffers. So far, we got our reactors, we have our catalysts which we discussed, and we have different types of buffers. And we could probably already answer your question, part of your question. Well, we'll get when she wakes up, we'll answer it. We'll go to another couple things, we'll come back to a question. Now we have the 4th factor, or the amplifying factors. These are things which make things worse. And we're going to discuss the concept here of chanan. Chanan is an acronym for chaticha na'asit nevela, which literally means the piece became forbidden. What do I mean? Pot number 1, say I have a little bit of pork falls into my potatoes, but don't worry, I did it by mistake, and my potatoes are more than 60 times the volume of the pork, and it gets all mixed together, kosher. All right? What happens if my pork falls into 30 times the volume of, 30 times its volume, cooks it, and then afterwards I add from another pot the other 30. What's the halacha then? So we say what happened first when this was being cooked with the 30, that whole thing became chanan, those pieces became nevela, they became non-kosher, and now if I mix that afterwards, I really need 30 times that entire first amount of potatoes for it then to be batal. Okay, so this is amplifying my isser. Initially, from a biblical perspective, this only really applies to meat and milk because I had my meat and then I mixed it with my milk, and my entire meat has become all of a sudden non-kosher. But the rabbis later on applied that also to other prohibitions. So to give some examples here, say I have a meat soup and I drop a drop of milk into my meat soup. 1 in 60 will be okay. Let's say, however, floating on top of my meat soup, so not halfway in, halfway out, but floating directly on top of my meat soup, I have a piece of meat, and my luck is so that the milk actually falls onto that piece of meat on top of my soup. So what happens now is that piece of meat becomes chanan, and now even though the soup might be 60 times the volume of my drop of milk, it's not 60 times the volume of my piece of meat, and now my soup's actually now not allowed, it becomes forbidden. So one of the questions the rabbi will ask you is, when everything mixed in, did it mix in all together at once, or did it kind of happen in stages? If it happened in stages, then we have to be worried, maybe we've got a scenario of chanan.
Could you, if it's just on that bit of meat, could you take that out of that?
If you not it, probably. The other thing is, if it dropped on a piece of meat and you saw it dropping and you quickly mixed everything out straight away, then you can get away with it. That's an interesting question. I think so. Yeah. All right. Next. Okay, so let's give some examples. Milk falling into my meat soup. It's cooked together. One milk to it. We do have the ratio of bittul, so you would think it's permissible. But it actually fell on the meat piece first. It became chanan, and therefore it's now really one non-kosher piece to say 20 pieces of meat soup, and it's forbidden.
If you have any examples that are could actually happen, like obviously you don't walk around with a carton of milk over the top of your meat soup. Do let me know, because often in these scenarios I'm thinking, I can't imagine how that could ever happen. So if you've got it,
I don't deal a lot in kitchens, but I deal a lot in factories, and we had this scenario last week.
You can have 2 pots on the stove, and someone puts the. You've got 2 pots on the stove, and you go to stir one of the pots, and you just drop the spoon, and you get a splash. That's the most common is where something splashes from one pot to another when you've got space on the stove.
But that would be a case of Hanan, or that would just be a case of milk?
Depends how much and what.
Right.
I remember years ago with pots that I threw out afterwards, because I didn't have a rabbi in Canberra at the time, when I was cooking on two sides of the stove, and I tasted the meat, and then I stupidly put the spoon back into the wrong pot. So, that was a waste of a milchik soup as well.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a discussion. I don't think we can take this in the end, but if you dip a milchik spoon twice into a pot of meat, I think Sephardim are a little bit more stringent than Ashkenazim in this scenario, but the concern is maybe when I put the spoon in the first time, a vast majority of the spoon left, of the volume of the milk in the spoon left the spoon, went into the meat soup, but also you had some of the meat go back into the spoon. That meat then reacted with the spoon, and it became non-kosher. And then when I put it in the second time, because of Hanan, I now actually have to measure the volume of 2 spoons rather than 1 spoon. It's a bit of you could spend a few days on that one. The scenario we had recently, it was a cream cheese company, and they had a product which they also mix it with 4% prawns. So, and that comes in contact with it. So, and then that gets mixed with something else afterwards. Because it got first mixed with the prawns, we weren't worrying about the 4% prawns, we were worrying about the entire cheese. It became non-kosher, and then later on, we have to deal with it. Also with canneries, we always have this issue where it might be that the bacon flavor has 1% bacon, but the way that they do the cans, they do like a general fill, and then they do like a specific fill afterwards to make sure it brings it up to the correct level. So in the general fill, there won't be 1 in 60, but with the specific fill afterwards, it would be 1 in 60, but because it's done in 2 shots, we have the issue of Hanan. So kitchen-wise, maybe you can give me some examples, but factories, we do come across it here and there. Okay, diminishing factors. So the first concept is nat bar nat, which is again an acronym for noten tam bar noten tam. So if I cook meat in my pot, the taste of the meat is given into the walls of the pot. That's a noten tam. That is one transfer of taste. Afterwards, I cook a potato, which looks like an egg, in my pot, and now the taste of the meat goes from my pot into my potato. So I've got 2 noten tam, 2 transfers of taste. That's a nat bar nat, a noten tam bar noten tam. Now, the question is, can I eat that potato with a piece of cheese? And the answer is, depends. Sephardim, you can probably get away with it. Ashkenazim, or even some Sephardim these days, and Ashkenazim, no. Essentially, this would have the dinner of a meat equipment, and you can't eat that with dairy, even though it's not banana. If you did it by mistake, you wouldn't have made something which is non-kosher. Say I did afterwards cook that potato with the cheese. In a bidi evet scenario, then because by the time the taste of the meat has gone from the meat into the pot, into the potato, into the cheese, it's already weakened the taste, and therefore when it gets cooked together, we don't say it becomes forbidden. To eat it in the first instance, that you actually need to have 3 noten tams. So if I had my meat was cooked with the pot, which was 3 times, then you could in the first instant consider that to be parov. Now,
does that make any difference if you wait a day to when the potato gets cold and then you
not if you wait a day with the potato,
hot?
but if you wait a day with a pot,
becomes
we're going to get, that's going to be our second diminishing factor in a second. But now this law of nat bar nat does only applies to permitted food. So only if it's fleishik or milchik, and your question is this thing fleishik or is this thing milchik? But if I'm cooking in a non-kosher pot, no matter how many transfers of taste there is, it's always going to remain non-kosher.
Sorry, with the potato.
Yes.
Are you cooking it with the meat or just with the pot that's been
Just
cooked?
with the pot that's been...
That's been like
yeah.
in boiling water that the...
Yeah.
In the flesh pot.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. This. So here's an example: meat pot, parv. I've cooked them together. Is there bittul? Well, if there is bittul, say I've got so much parv in my meat pot that it's 60 times the volume of the pot, then we consider it to be parv. Say, however, there is. Do we worry about Hanan? And the answer is no. Hanan only applies to forbidden foods. Hanan doesn't apply at all to when we're talking about permissible foods. We're just wondering if it's milchik or if it's fleishik. But if, for instance, there is no bittul, we've got another heter which is sort of diminishing factor. It's not bar nat, and then, well, it depends. According to some Sephardim, be parv, but for Ashkenazim, we have to deal it as meat equipment. So you see how the this kind of diagram starts to work.
Does it stay meat equipment?
Sorry?
Does it stay meat equipment permanently?
That potato would, yes.
pot, so it always, even if you've cooked meat in it once.
Well, if in the first instance, we'll talk about. Well, let me give you 2 more slides and I'll answer your question, and I'll also answer the question of the lady next to you too. The second diminishing factor is something called noten tam lifgam, that it gives a bad taste. The concern of non-kosher tastes going into a kosher food is only if it's a tam l'shvach, if it's a good taste. If it's giving a bad taste, then from a halachic perspective, there's no forbidden things. And one of the laws over here is, they say that if a taste has been absorbed in your pot for more than 24 hours, that taste becomes pagam, that taste becomes an off taste. And therefore, in a oops situation, if I've used that pot for something else and it hasn't been used for, say I'm cooking meat in a milchike pot, and I haven't used that pot for milk for over 24 hours, my soup is kosher. I can actually eat the soup. The pot still needs to be kosher because in the first instance, you can't rely on the fact that it's more than 24 hours old, but my soup becomes kosher. So with regards to your question, which you just asked, remind me, which was?
Does the pot become permanently?
Fleshik. Okay, we'll come back to that one, but with regards to the question you asked beforehand, if you have a milchike spoon, okay, so then it depends. Number one, we have to see, what's the volume of the spoon versus the volume of the meat? And is the spoon 24 hours old or not?
The soup is still hot.
And the soup, even if the soup is hot. So even if the soup is hot, firstly, the couple of leniencies we might be able to employ is perhaps the volume of the spoon is less than 60 times the volume of the soup. And even if it's not, if that spoon was it's been more than 24 hours since it's been used for milk, then my soup is okay, but my spoon I still have to kasher.
Well, the spoon doesn't become kasher because it's gone into power. So it stays milky.
I say it's milk. Oh, we're talking about milk.
The question is when the soups become milky.
Oh no, your soup. So yeah, so with those two things,
And if you don't know how long the spoon was used for milk,
then it becomes a suffix, and then it becomes a bit of a more of a detail. Yeah.
I asked Rabbi Rosenzweig's question about the assumption that you make with something coming from a cutlery drawer.
Right.
And he said you review each item that you remove individually. Mm-hmm. So even if you had washed and reused many spoons in the previous day, you still assume that each removal is individual. So if it's out of the cutlery drawer and you hadn't used most of the spoons in the previous 24 hours, you can assume, based on Rov, it was probably not a spoon that was used in 24 hours.
And the other thing you can add to that is detergent. Sometimes in a oopsie situation, even though it's less than 24 hours old, if it's been washed with hot detergent, you can assume that any taste which was in there has been, and that's what we actually rely on this sometimes in
so if it's been washed in the dishwasher and taken clean out of the drawer, even if it's less than 24 hours,
there's
put it into a part of a soup pot.
There's room to be lenient. Again, that's the question you might have to call up your particular rabbi to see how he would hold with that detergent thing.
But if you can work out the volume,
then you're okay.
The dishwasher will give you another issue though of it being because the heat of the water in the dishwasher is at boiling point, whereas it's above 45 degrees. Whereas if you wash the sink, you put it in the sink, it's a different story because you don't wash that hot water. So
exactly. So it could be if it's washed with cold detergent, then that might not have the same halacha as if it's hot detergent. So there'll be a difference between a sink versus the dishwasher. But in the sink, maybe if you use your gloves, which might prove that it's more than 45 degrees Celsius, and that's why you do.
Why if you put it in the hot dishwasher?
Yeah.
You said you shouldn't do it with the hot. So why would it change its composition?
Okay, so the theory over here is that my spoon, I've got an absorption of milchike taste inside of it. If I'm now absorb detergent inside of that spoon as well, that's going to give it an off taste. So even in the first instance, I can't use that milchike spoon for fleshik, but if by mistake I've put it in, the theory is that perhaps I can consider it to be a tam dafgam. Does that answer your question, or I've still lost you? I've confused you more. Okay, I'm sorry. Some of these things do get a little bit detailed. Let's look at some. Oh, and the big exception to this 24-hour rule is sharp foods. If it's an onion soup or something, you're going to be stuck. Let's look at some examples. I have a meat soup. I have a spoon. It's a milchike spoon. I put it in, right? If my spoon is more than 24 hours old, then I don't have. My soup is going to be okay, even if that's a really, really big spoon. But I still will need to kasher my spoon. Clear? Kind of.
It's a fleshik soup.
That's a very, very dark coloured fleshik soup.
So how do you have to kasher that spoon?
Boiling water. Yeah.
In
You've
a pot, or can you just pour
Dipped it
boiling
twice,
water?
I know.
No, but even if you've just tipped it very quickly,
Uh-huh.
do we care about the speed with which you dip or engage?
20 minutes, what?
It discusses this with regards to koshering. How long does the koshering actually have to take? But with regards to blias, I think we're machman. We even if it's just touched instantaneously, we're worried. I think.
The transfer,
Yeah.
as soon as it goes in, the transfer occurs. So you leave it in for a second or for an hour, it's irrelevant. Once it's got in there, it's got in there.
Yeah.
So because the transfer has happened at that point.
So washing it with cold water doesn't take away the...
No. And again, even with hot water, again, it's not something which you can rely on in the first instance. If you had an oopsie situation, the rabbi might ask, have you done this in the past? And that might be a reason, depending with, not everybody might rely on that leniency, but that might be a factor which you'll keep in mind when he's putting together his...
Sorry, Rabbi, just back to koshering the spoon. Does it
Yes.
have to be with tefillah? Do you have to dunk it, or can you just pour boiling water from the kettle?
So the general rule is, depending on how it became non-kosher, that's how you have to kosher it. So if I put it into a boiling pot of hot water, I will then need to use hot water. If it was because I poured hot water into it, you might be able to get away with koshering with hot water. But you have to wait. You have to wait 24 hours. Why do you have to wait 24 hours? You know why? Same rule over here.
Again, it's,
Take away the...
No, because if I kosher, say I've got non-kosher absorption in my spoon, and I kosher it, so the non-kosher goes out of the spoon and back into the spoon. But if you wait 24 hours, even if something will come back into that spoon, that taste is already lifgam, and therefore you're able to kosher. That's why there's a rule in there that you actually have to wait 24 hours, and that's why that's.
Milky pot or a fleshing pot?
Sorry.
Which pot do you kasher it in?
Milk and fleshing.
If it's over 20, if it's less than 24 hours, more than 24 hours old, it doesn't really make a difference now, does it?
so really you have to ask a shaver every time because there's so many factors.
There are so many factors, but the point over here is I'm not going to be able to go through every single detail. What I am able to show you is what's the general. Number one, you can walk out of the shir saying, if it's cold, by mistake something makes it cold. Okay, I don't have to worry about that. If something does happen, I don't lose my wits. I say, well, the first workout, did I use that yesterday? Did it come with dishwasher? You remember the type of details which you can now ask the rabbi. And that's how you handle your blunders, because you're not going to be able to remember every single detail. Your rabbi hopefully does. Just don't call me.
Does it matter what type of spoon it is? Whether it's
Metal or... This is a very interesting discussion these days. There are some differences. So in wood, old type of metal, these laws were written about cast iron and wood and stone and stuff. If it's a earthenware, there's slightly different laws because it'll be harder to kosher the spoon afterwards. The big discussion these days is stainless steel, because technically, from science, I put my food science hat. Stainless steel is impervious. There is no absorptions occurring in stainless steel. And I walk into every single factory and I tell them, yeah, we're going to have to kosher it because there's taste inside the walls, and they look, it's stainless steel. What are you on about? But because the way kosher law works is I can never get, what's the plural of a precedent? Precedence. The precedence which we work off is off the cast iron, and therefore the same law as a custom, or some argue it's actually the law has applied to stainless steel. But if you look at any of the modern journals, one of the big debates going on the last couple of years is stainless steel. And already we've had one ruling from the OU. We had a big issue with one of our factories. And they said, well, you can be leading to this scenario based on a few things. Based on this, based on that, based on that. And one of the things they added, also because it's stainless steel. So they're not relying on it on the first instance, but it's already creeping into the mixture, I guess.
And plastic, what about plastic? In plastics, you can't just use it.
Well, you can, some say you can kosher plastic.
What was the earthenware you were talking about?
Earthenware. So that's
Earthenware.
not urbanware. No, not my snazzy jumper. Earthenware. So let's have some examples here. I've got a non-kosher pot. We have some kosher food which I've cooked inside the pot. There's no bittul, but if the pot wasn't used in 24 hours, then the food becomes permissible. Another example: meat pot and parav. Cooked it together. If there's bittul, then the product's going to be parav. We don't say chanan, of course. If there's no bittul, then, well, number one, it's not banat, and the pot is more than 24 hours old, and therefore, in this scenario, even Ashkenazim could eat that. So if I have a noodles, which I've cooked in my meat pot, and the pot was more than 24 hours old since it's been used for meat, and now the next day, I've decided I've got this leftover noodles, I want to melt some cheese on, The answer is yes, you can. But I'm not allowed to use a meat pot and cook noodles in it, having in mind that I'm going to have it with cheese. It's only an oopsie situation. It's already cooked. I've got leftovers. Now, b'di'avad, after the fact, I can then use it.
Sorry, if it's an upside, if you said you've cooked in a flash pot, it's parv, sitting in the fridge, and it's not that, I've decided to cook it, now it's suddenly, it's left over, I can now do it with cheese the next day, but it wasn't my intention when I cooked it. So it's the intention at the beginning.
Right.
If your intention is to cook it in a flash pot and then to have cheese on it later, you can't do it. But if you've cooked it, it's sitting there, and then it's not a mistake, it's really something you've decided afterwards to say that it's got a status of the intention of it was just there.
I guess the word oops doesn't really cover that, but b'di'avad, which means after the fact, after already been cooked, even though as long as your initial intention wasn't to do it, and that's fine.
I think I've cooked some noodles in
Yes.
a flashing pot.
Yes.
And they've been cold for 24 hours. But
The 24-hour rule is on your pot, not on your noodles. The question I'm going to ask you is, was your pot used for meat more or less for 24 hours before you cook the noodles?
No.
No. Okay.
But then if the noodles were put into a plastic container that had previously been used for fleischig, but hadn't been used probably for days, what happens to those noodles that have been sitting in that plastic container in the fridge, which I probably would have thought would be parva by now, but
number one, if it's in your plastic container and there's no liquid, kfisha doesn't occur. Kfisha soaking only occurs when there's liquid.
so there was no liquid.
Okay, so then you're talking about your noodles which have been cooked in a fleishik pot, comes to that scenario which we just discussed. As long as the pot was more than 24 hours old when you cooked the noodles, and it didn't cook those noodles with the intention to use it with milk, then I can now use the noodles to eat it with meat. But you did bring up another scenario, which is interesting. We'll go back to my soup scenario.
But it's intentional to put the cheese on.
But when you cook the noodles in the meat pot, did you have an intention to cook the noodles in the meat pot and then put my cheese on it, or I had an intention to make spaghetti bolognese and then had leftover noodles?
Because it turned into the 9 days without you thinking of it.
You see?
Is that when you took, like, I always thought Practical Kashrus Series, so you can eat it after or before milk, you just can't eat it with it.
That's correct. So that's with regards to eating with it. But here we're talking about even eating with it. There's a scenario, this scenario for Ashkenazim, you can even eat a cheskas basari with milchiks. That is, again, if the fleishik pot was more than 24 hours old since you've cooked fleish, and your intention when you cooked it was to actually eat it with fleish, but now I've got leftovers, then you are allowed to have it with milchiks.
On my bowl. Does it bowl?
You can have it in a milchik bowl.
Which you can heat up in the microwave?
Yes. Mind blowing.
What if the noodles were put into the flesh container when they were hot?
Oh, the flesh container.
It was a fleishik container used for meat in the last 24 hours hot.
No.
So then it's fine.
Again, there's a lot of details here, and you might want to just check. Are you sure I can eat this, Rabbi? But you get the general idea of how these things kind of work. Now, the other thing is, especially when we're talking about a non-kosher food, so something which is not recommended or not on the kosher list, is not because it's 100% pork. It itself has all these factors with it. So everything, if we say something's not kosher in the book, it's because, and it could be that now that this non-kosher food has been mixed with your kosher food at home, it might not be 100% non-kosher. It might be partially non-kosher. It could be that once you've already cooked it, it might be okay because of some of these things. Whatever goes into the kosher book is l'chatchila. It's in the first instance. We won't give a hechsher to something. We won't certify something which is only okay because, oops, the fact it's already made it okay, it's okay. Because we don't certify things like that on an initial basis. That's why a lot of times you'll call up the office and say, oy vey, I bought this product. What do I have to kasher my kelim? And we'll say, don't worry about it. Is because in the factory itself, there has been some of this ruling which we're able to therefore say, it's okay. So basically, whenever you have a question, whenever you have a mess up, you have a blunder, there's really 5 questions which your rabbi might ask. Number 1, what exactly are the reactants? Is it meat and milk, parv, kosher, non-kosher? The question he's going to ask is how non-kosher is a non-kosher? You might not be able to know that, but he might call kosher Australia and say, well, you say it's not kosher, but why is it not kosher? The second thing is there a catalyst? Was there heat? Was there salt? Was there soaking? Is it a sharp food? If no, no question. Eat, you're fine. If there even was a catalyst, maybe there was a buffer. How much was it comparatively? Was there any doubts involved? Number 4 was, did anything get mixed in at once? Or was there multiple mixtures, so I might have an issue of Hanan? And finally, even if I got all the bad things, there's still some factors which might save me, which is, number 1, do you have any pogrom factors? Was your keli more than 24 hours old? Do we have a scenario perhaps of nat bar nat? And this then gives us our full picture.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. As I said, don't panic. Questions?
What if you find a power of knife in your milking sink?
If you find a power of knife in your milchik
Know what happened?
and you don't know what happened to it, so you can assume and usually you can assume a few things. You can assume that even if there was milchiks cooked with it, that even if you wash it together with the milchiks, maybe it was washed below Yatzeletas boy, below 45 degrees Celsius, especially if you usually wash your dishes in your sink with your hands. If there was detergent involved, that's again something which you can look at. So, and you won't use it anyway until it's over 24 hours old, so there's a few things which the rabbi will, depending on the situation, look at, but it also depends on the person.
The whole concept of like paro in terms of where you wash up, how you wash up, tubs, no tubs, the whole idea of cooking parov.
Yes.
What is the best way to deal with that? Let's say you've got your whole parov set, you've got your parov pots and spoons and sponge and all the rest of it. If you consistently wash it, let's say in your fleishik sink, which has been cleaned, so it has no actual fleishiks in it, it's a sparkling clean sink, it's not hot, can you wash your hot parov pot in there and still call the pot parov? Under running water.
So, cold water or hot? You said, do you wash it with cold or do you wash it with hot?
Just running with bare hands. So less than that's
I would want to look this up properly before I give you a clear answer.
Couldn't you do what with it?
you bang the
There was a sink there as well.
Into the sink.
And there's a lot of details there, so it would have to be under certain controls. But a lot of people have that issue. Most people won't have a set parov sink.
Doesn't want to give me an answer?
I'd rather like to look before I say something recorded. I would like to.
If I can give you more of a factory question
Yes.
along those lines.
Sure.
If you've got 2 sinks,
Yes.
but I mean, when I think about most of the 2 sink setups that I see, it's a single piece of metal. So it's one installation that's got 2 sink components and a separation in between. It's usually you buy it, if you buy it from Bunnings, it's one sheet of stainless steel. So how do we consider that to be 2 sinks?
So usually you'll find that the actual walls aren't shared, and then there's a length of metal. And the question is, how long would the paste travel up the metal? The pipes usually plastics, is more less. More flowing up.
Yeah, the water flowing up when you have detergent.
Again, I want to be careful before what I say. I'd rather look up before. If I'm not sure about something, I'd rather look it up before and not give the wrong answer. But if you guys really want to follow up on that question,
Yeah, it's a really important question.
it's a really important question. So if you send me an email or something and remind me,
Okay.
or send Rita at info@kosher.org.au, which will go to Rita, and then if Rita's not worried with weddings and stuff like that, then she can respond to me.
So if you have from before,
Yep. There you go.
from before you have the big fleishik spoon that you accidentally stirred your parov soup with.
Mm-hmm.
So now, when you put that parov soup in a bowl to serve, you can't put cheese in it.
Depends.
It was a big
How-
spoon.
Okay, it depends on the size of your spoon. Depends on when was that last used for meat. Depends on.
So a ladle is definitely, because it's big.
But how much the ladle did you put into the actual bowl?
How much ladle, but also you have to look at the ladle volume. So the actual volume of the ladle, how much is that? The walls of the ladle. If you have a really big pot of soup, that might be 1 in 60. You'd have to.
Oh, so it's not the volume that the ladle holds.
No, it's the volume of
It's
the walls.
actual-
The halacha runs on the assumption that the volume of the walls is filled with halachic absorption.
What if you put, it doesn't matter what type of material the bowl or the pot is. So usually your pots, when you talk about heating things up and everything, is all going to be metal. But what happens if you have a chicken that's say you've popped it on a plate or on a melamine or plastic?
So practically, I'm not going to get to all the little nuances and that, but practically from your food perspective, probably won't make a difference. Maybe if it's glass and you're Sephardi, maybe there's some leeway. Sorry? Harris. But the difference is going to be if your pot becomes not kosher, how do you kasher it? That's where the difference will come in. That if it's an earthenware, not your urbanware, then it's I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. Then there's going to be issues in kashering it. If it's going to be Teflon, again, there's going to be issues kashering it. This is an easy crowd. Come on.
All right.
Yes, Rita.
Just out of curiosity, does the method of heating make a difference? Induction heating as opposed to gas heating?
So microwave induction. From a kosher perspective, from a cooking perspective on Shabbos, it might make a difference. How bad it is. From a basar b'cholov, if it's going to be forbidden to benefit from or only forbidden to eat, it might make a difference. But with regards to kashering, no. Yes?
New class of questions again. Ovens. How necessary is this idea of a milchig fleischig oven, the time you wait in between, how much you clean it in between, pyrolytic, not pyrolytic, etc.
Didn't Rabbi one deal with all these questions?
Did he?
Yes.
I missed that share.
So
Sorry.
It's online.
Got it. I will go to that. Thank you very much.
Your
everybody.
research is probably much, much better than me, and he'll be able to, I think he covered all that quite thoroughly, I heard. And in a very nice manner as well. Good. All right. We're good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.